Good to see you, Jeff. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
We're so excited to have you. Um, I know a lot about your history because I've watched a lot of barbershop videos, but for those of you who don't, can you talk a little bit about your barbershop history and how you ended up in Stormfront?
Uh, the first one is much easier than the second one.
Sure.
Well, my dad was a barber shopper because our next door neighbor was so proud of what he did. My dad was literally out cutting the grass, and we had moved into a house, and they didn't know each other, and he just turned the lawnmower off and came over and introduced himself, and within 30 seconds said, "Do you like to sing?" And my dad was like, "Yeah, sure." He said, "Well, you've got to come and be a part of this chorus that I belonged to, which was the Dukes of Harmony." This would have been 1976. So they were on the cusp of winning international in 77. So my dad's first international was in Philadelphia, and he won a gold medal. And he was like, "Yeah, there's nothing to this. You just show up. First contest, win a gold medal." But literally, we would never have known about it if we hadn't bought that house, and if the guy next door who had been in that chorus for many years wasn't so proud of it that he was willing to come over and introduce himself and invite my dad to come and sing. It literally isn't harder than that.
Wow.
That's part one. Part two is Stormfront. I left Riptide in 05. And
for those of you who don't know, Riptide, you were singing bass, right? And you sang with them for many years, many months.
And my son one day, because we were really busy, and my son at that time was about he was about 11, I guess. And one day he said, "Why do you love your quartet more than me?" And I was like, "What?" And then I started, then it sort of like all galvanized, and I was like, "Yep, I'm done." And so I did about 3 or 4 more shows, and then I was out. I wasn't doing any coaching. I wasn't judging. I literally didn't have any barbershop for about 2.5 years, focusing on my family. And then the phone rang, and it was Sid. He had moved to Atlanta, and he said, "We're thinking about changing parts on tenor. What would you think about auditioning?" It's like, because at that time they had just come off international here in Denver in 07, and they were third, right? So I was like, okay, so you're third in the world, and you can't find anybody who knows how to sing the part. Like, sure, like Royce Ferguson might be available. Just saying. Right. So they took somebody in a non-comedy quartet on the other end of the vocal scale, and I auditioned. They offered me the job, and I took it, and it was an incredible blessing. Not just because we had the good fortune to win, but I made 3 new friends, and their families are amazing. In fact, that's why we moved to Denver from Atlanta after 30 years. We sold all our stuff because these people are my family now.
That's some good quartet love right there. Can you talk about shifting from bass to tenor? What were some challenges with that?
Oh God, I'm still trying to figure it out. I had only ever sung tags on tenor. The first time I ever sang tenor an entire song was my audition for Stormfront. So I wasn't sure if I could actually make it the entire way through a song. But I had practiced it. They gave me a song to learn. And so in my audition, we were working on something, and Darren, who, I'm just going to take a little aside here, Cano, you know who Darren is, but for the rest of you, the baritone in Stormfront is Darren Drown, and he is a choral director here in Arapahoe County, which is southeast of Denver. And his high school choirs, are like the Westminster, the vocal majority of the choral world. They're so good. It's insane. And people actually move here so their kids can go to high school and be in his performing arts programs vocally.
Wow.
Like the way people move to Texas so their kids can play in a certain football program. And so outside of barbershop, Darren is this choral rock star. And most people don't know about his barbershop life. And the people in the barbershop life don't have really any idea who he is outside of barbershop. But he's probably the best vocal pedagogy guy in the country, in my opinion. And And I don't say that lightly, because there's some stunning vocal people in our society and around. But Darren is like the horse whisperer when it comes to, he is so far beyond. He can tell you to stand on your head and stack BBs and gargle peanut butter, or I don't know where he comes up with the stuff that he comes up with. But to your question, in my audition, he said, okay, I hear something. So if you're willing to do the work, I'll show you what to do. So for me, you know, it was like if you were a professional baseball player and your batting coach was Babe Ruth, right? Or Mark McGuire. And
Right.
you could literally just turn to your left and go, so what do I do here? Like, that's what I had. And I was just dedicated to make sure that I didn't know what I was doing, but if he would tell me what to do, by God, I would do it. And the first thing he said was, take this CD, and it was Roger Love's Speech Level Singing. He said, I want you to work on this an hour a day. And I was like, okay, because I mean, I didn't know. I just memorized notes, but I didn't know what I was doing. And I worked on that sickness and health every day for an hour, never failed. He said, I want you to name 2 of your favorite tenors. And I said, well, that's easy. It's Drew Kirkman from Michigan Jake and Doug Anderson from 139th Street. He said, okay, I can kind of see where you're at. He said, so I want you to figure out how to be right in the middle of that. And those were both really bright tenors. And I was lucky that I could sing bright and loud in tenor, in falsetto. And I've got a pretty high range, even though I had sung bass. But my break is the struggle that I had. So in the treble clef around C, D, E, you know, that,
right.
For me, that's like singing through cheesecloth. So it's like, I got nothing. I can do that. I can do that all day long and never get tired.
Right.
All day long. Swear to God, have you ever seen us do the Nutcracker?
I don't think
Stormfront?
Maybe
you ever
I
seen
haven't.
Stormfront do the Nutcracker?
No.
And I do this chicken thing. and I mean, it is loud and it is sonorous to listen to.
Right.
But I can do that and do it. People come up and go, how do you not ruin your voice? And I don't know the answer to that.
Right.
It's probably because I'm a big Whitesnake and Van Halen fan. So I've been trying to be David Coverdale for years.
Right.
But Darren said, if you do what I tell you to do and practice this thing an hour a day and keep listening to Doug Anderson and Drew Kirkman, which I do that anyway. He said, I think it's going to take you 3 years to get where you, in your head, where you think you want to be. And in 3 years, we won.
Wow. That's
so
amazing.
Darren's the man. That's all I can say.
So he told you to listen to tenors, those 2 tenors that you loved. What was this CD this is speech level singing?
Yeah, it's called Speech Level Singing by Roger Love. And I'd never heard of it, but Darren said, I'll make you a copy. And he sent me the CD, and it's a series of exercises, working the break, especially for someone, basses can sing tenor, I think a little easier because our break is a little lower. So people that are trying to sing tenor, the thing I would say is figure out wherever your break is. And then you want to sort of work a half step above and a half step below. It kind of sounds like Twilight Zone. Like, hey, if we're going to say to you the Twilight Zone theme, what would that sound like? Yeah. So you got to figure out wherever your break is. And if you want to stretch your break, then you need to sing a half step below that, then to the break, and then a half above the break, and then back to the break, and then down. It's literally
just for an hour every day.
And well, you work, but that's part of it. But there's all these other exercises, but it's really focused on the break for a tenor. And then it starts to stretch, and it takes time. And I'm like really impatient, as you can see all this nonsense on the wall behind me.
Right.
And I want it to happen now. And Darren had to break me of that. And he said, it's not going to be quick. And I think I was about 6 months into Stormfront when he played me a recording from my first rehearsal to where we were.
Wow.
And I was really surprised because I didn't hear that progress in my head, because it's like watching water boil. And then we were really lucky to be busy. So every 2 weeks we were in a different city doing a show. Side note, people say, how do you guys rehearse? Well, I mean, we spent hours and hours before we walked on your stage to do your show, because we would start rehearsing at 10 in the morning. And if the show was at 7 o'clock at night and we weren't on stage till 9, we'd been putting in 8-9 hours of rehearsal.
Wow.
And so we would work, but Darren, every 2 weeks, he would say, here's what I want you to do. And I would work on that. And then we'd get together and I'd say, okay, is this what you mean? He'd say, you're close, but you're the format of your vowel, you're looking more to an as opposed to an ah. All right. So I've been trying so hard. I kind of wanted to make him happy. And so I'd go back and I do it again, but he was very gentle and very encouraging, but the progress was in millimeters. And that was honestly the hardest part for me, because I'm super impatient and I'm a goal setter. So that was the hardest thing, but I never gave up. And the exercises in this Roger Love are one of the things that's really, really helpful. And I mean, I can tell you what it is. You don't have to go buy the CD. But I found in my range, my E vowel was the one that I could really sting that. It was simple. And if it was saying an open vowel, like an O or an ah, I was spilling so much air that I was running out before we got through the whatever the 4-chord exercise was.
Right.
And so Darren would say, okay, so in your case, and it's different for everybody, but in tenor, if let's say an E vowel, and like in my case was the best one, it just had the most freedom and ring to it. He would say, I want you to start there on an E, and then I want you to slowly turn it to an A. And, so if the distance is from E to A, I would get about that far. And as the vowel turned and the back of my throat opened up a little bit more, and it would all go to hell. And it was frustrating, because I knew that I had to go all the way from here to here in that transition, but I could only get about halfway. And so I was just frustrated, but eventually I could go 3/4 of the way before it would fall apart. And now I can go the entire way, but that took time. And then he would say, you always got to start. And this is part of that Roger Love speech level singing is figure out what you do really well, but don't stay there. Right. If we just warm up and practice in our tenderloin ringy range, we like that because it sounds good, but then we never actually work on the stuff we need to work on. So Darren would push me and say, now go to an O vowel. Now start with E, always start with E. So just try to turn and turn and turn. And so I had to work on all of them. And it was just like, again, if you were a batting guy and you had Mark McGuire to turn to, never had to pick up the phone. I just had to go like this. Darren, what do I, like when I sang with Don Barnick in Riptide for 1 year, can you imagine? Like I should have sang baritone and Don should have sang bass, but Don was like, no, you sing bass. So again, like singing, like I'm such a Keepsake fan and I'm such a Don Barnick fan. And so all I had to do was turn to my left to go, Don, on the end of How Deep is the Ocean, how did you do that?
Right.
Like, well, and he would just crush it in my living room. And I'd be like, I'm out.
Yeah.
There's no possible way.
Right.
But I was blessed to have amazing people. And I'm the recipient of a lot of grace and a lot of kindness from barbershoppers who I really look up to. And Darren obviously being, one of them, and Dawn and Joe Connolly, so many other people that have been very kind to me. And it's interesting that they always seem to have the same common denominator, which is pay it forward.
Right.
Yeah. That's part of why I said yes to this, is that if there's anything about this that I can impart that might help change somebody else's experience, then that's awesome.
Well, I think we're 15 minutes in and you've already given us a ton, but let's keep going.
Yep.
So you were talking these E to certain vowel exercises. Are these things that Darren would tell you to do on your own, or are these things that you would do in the context of the quartet?
On my own.
Okay.
On my own. Everyone, especially when you were in 4 different cities, homework was mandatory, but not at rehearsal. So I can honestly tell you that in 12 years, not one time has anybody ever shown up and let the other 3 down. But the homework time was homework time. When we got together as a quartet, then we had to figure out how to make that do that, right? The consonants and the sounds. So that's what the rehearsal time was for. But homework time is homework time. And we all busted our tail. I can remember many nights being dead tired at 11:30 at night and be like, ugh, I still got to figure out this music, because I'm not going to be the guy who shows up, and doesn't know his stuff. Because Darren's about 6'4" and Sid's about 6'5", and I'm only 5'8", so it wasn't going to go well. But yeah, I would work and work and work as I was driving. I drove my family nuts, and I would just practice all the time, just trying to transition vowels. It's really like anything else, right? There's a certain amount of muscle memory, and you have to rewrite the hard drive. So repetition, 10,000 hours. Turning Point, Malcolm Caldwell stuff. So you just got to do it and do it and do it. And what gets measured gets improved. And you are what you repeatedly do. So, I was willing to just, and I've dug ditches for a living. That's hard, right?
Yeah.
I don't want this to sound like this was some kind of, like I cured cancer or anything. I was just willing to put the work in, and Darren believed that I would, because Darren's like older brother, because the 3 of them all grew up together in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, but Darren's the oldest until I came along, and they kind of look up to him. Obviously he's this musical savant, but Darren was the guy that talked the other 2 into letting me be the tenor in Stormfront. So I just never wanted to let him down, and never wanted him to ever think, maybe I made a mistake. So I grinded, but had I not known what to do, I would have spun my wheels doing things that might not have really helped everybody. And so I was lucky that, that he said, do this. Like there wasn't any wiggle room. It's just do this. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. It's a lot of trust, and it takes just totally getting rid of your ego, right?
Yeah. Oh, listen, you talk about getting rid of your ego. I mean, I spent 2.5 years after Riptide thinking my phone was going to ring. I mean, I had 5 medals singing bass, right? How my phone never rang once in 2.5 years, except one time, the lead of 12, who was it? KJ's quartet. Sorry.
Oh, Fortino. Yeah.
Yeah. Fortino. His dad called me and asked me and I was like, oh, here it comes. Here it comes. And he actually asked me if I knew anybody who might want to sing bass. It was such a kick in the rear end, which I needed. And then, so yeah, by the time I got the offer to sing in Stormfront, I was like a whipped puppy.
Right.
I would have said yes to anything. And they were like, really?
Yeah.
You're willing to say, I was like, yes, tell me what to do. Tell me to put on a dress. I don't care. Just tell me what to do, which is why we got away with so much murder, because they had a new toy to play with.
Right.
And if you watch some of those contest videos, you can see Jim having an extraordinary amount of fun at my discomfort.
That's amazing. What was the year like leading up to your international win? What sort of steps did you take to make sure you were ready?
Well, let me lower this down a little bit. We 18 months before that, and like I said, when I joined the quartet, it was going every 2 weeks. But in the year that we won, people said, well, you better buckle up. And I was like, how can I get busier? But at one point we were turning down 5 shows for every show we took.
Wow.
It was absolutely, it was insane. I thought Riptide was busy, but this was nuts. So we were just pouring so much into this, and then about 18 months, we sat down with our wives and we said, look, we have this plan to try to win in Philadelphia, and we might not. I mean, good God, ringmasters and
Right.
old school. I mean, but we're going to throw everything we have at this, and if we don't, we'll still compete, but we're never going to ask you to go through this again. And they all said, okay. So we brought, our two main coaches were Chad Guyton and Rick LaRosa. Chad Guyton from Four Voices, for some of you who may or may not know that, and from my favorite comedy quartet, Fred, Rick LaRosa was the lead. So we had somebody who could help us with the singing and somebody who could help us with the visual. And we took them to just about every show for 18 months that we did. And remember, that was about every 2 weeks.
Wow.
So we knew that we needed to have real-time guys with us. And so a big compliment to Patty LaRosa and a big compliment to Lauren Guyton.
Right.
Because they were just as much responsible for letting their husbands be away from home that often. But we literally took them with us to just about every show for the year and a half before we won. And then we would work and work and work for hours in the afternoon. And then we would go and do the show where we would test drive material. And then we would debrief afterwards. And then we would go and do the glow and do stuff again and try to tweak it and try to tweak it. Because what people don't understand about comedy, unless you've been in it, and I certainly didn't, was a comedy quartet works 3 times harder than anybody else. And I'd been in a quartet that had done well doing one of those things, trying to sing the lights out. But in a comedy quartet, you got to sing well. You got to then put all the shtick into it. And then you got to do it all again. So, you know, it's amazing. I have never, ever worked harder off stage and had it easier on stage. Think about that. Now with Riptide, it was the other way around.
Right.
It was easy. All we did was open our mouths. We had a God-gifted thing. But when we got on stage, it always looked like we were trying too hard. And that's why we only got as far as third. But with Stormfront, it was the opposite. It was unbelievable the amount of work that had to go into putting those things together to make it look like we weren't trying. But then when you get on stage and you've done it so much, so that was part of that leading up to Philadelphia. But the biggest thing I would tell you, and I'd heard this from Gotcha and other, because I used to ask all the quartets that were winning when I wasn't winning, and I would say, what's different? Tell me, like, did you feel it coming? Did you know? And the biggest thing everybody would tell me, and this absolutely happened to us, was when all of the things you can't control start to happen and line up. Because there's only so much, right? You learn your notes, you learn your bits, you try to be funny, whatever. But there was all kinds of things that were starting to happen. And I'd heard that from other quartets that had won, that you start to get that feeling like when you're riding a wave, if you surf or if you've ever, done any, boogie boarding, and you feel the ocean pick you up.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what it felt like from midwinter in Tampa until we won.
Wow.
Yeah. It's absolutely surreal. It's in a way, it's kind of a spiritual thing.
Right.
Because when things start to line up and happen that you have no control over, then it's really, it's very emotional. And it's why the tear after you win, the tears and all that, because of you sacrificed so much, you've put your family through so much, but you realize that the 1 in a gajillion chance of winning, that you put 4 human lives together that actually like each other. and we were all in a place in our lives, the timing has to be right with jobs and kids. You have to have 4 wives that get along or it's dead. It only takes 1 wife that doesn't get along and it won't last.
Yeah.
And so we were, all of those things, you start to realize all of those things that were, you have no control over, that started to line up, that were such a blessing. And then the music gets better as a result of that. So quartets that don't get along, if you can't figure out how to get along, you just got to do something else and find 3 other people, because because the audience so picks up on the fact that there's a rub with personalities. This guy might, how all of that. And you can really, really tell with Stormfront that we really like and get along and love each other. That's not fake at all. Right. And half the time we're trying to crack ourselves up, and we just hope you come along and enjoy it. Well, you're about to see that in, does everybody know about this show coming up in Nashville?
I think maybe not. Why don't you talk about that for a second?
Okay, so everybody, this is there's 11 AIC quartets. It's July the 3rd. We're all flying into Nashville. There's going to be no audience, which is going to be really weird for a comedy quartet. But we're going to do an AIC show because the contest got canceled this year. The AIC's gotten together and partnered with the Harmony Foundation, and Harmony Foundation has raised $150,000 so that it's free. Yes, you heard that word right. It is free. We are not charging a penny for this show. You're going to get 11 AIC quartets, and you can go to the bathroom and have a hot dog when Stormfront's up. But Crossroads is going to be there. Vocal Spectrum's going to be there. Are you ready for this? Gas House Gang, Keepsake, Interstate Rivals. Are you kidding me? Like, I would pay money just to see those 3 quartets. It's going to be a barn burner. We've got all kinds of extra stuff planned. It's absolutely going to be amazing. And it's going to be emceed by Debbie Cleveland.
Wow, this is going to be a great show.
It's going to be amazing. It's free. It is free. We're hoping to have 50 to 100,000 people worldwide watching this thing, both barbershoppers and non-barbershoppers, because it is going to be the biggest cavalcade that has ever happened ever in barbershop. And the largest audience that's ever seen an AIC show is about 5,000.
Right.
So they just literally bought enough bandwidth to handle 100,000 people. So everybody, July the 3rd, put it on your calendars. It's the only barbershop going on.
Right.
And maybe the only barbershop you're going to see for another year. So everybody needs to tell everybody they know. Let's make this thing a healing thing. The country's been going through some tough stuff. It's time to sing and it's time to heal. And that's what we're hoping is going to happen from this event.
Well, you got 65 people here who I'm sure will want to tune in for that. Let's get back to, I've got a couple, maybe I'll ask 2 more questions, and then it seems like people have been throwing a ton of questions in the chat, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. I want to know what you think the biggest mistakes that tenors make are.
Well, in my case, having gone from one end to the other, Darren would say, "Stop singing bass." And I'm like, "What?" I mean, I was singing the tenor notes. He's like, no, your production. Because I'm, as you can tell from my talking voice, I'm really more a baritone. But I can get away with some murder with bass. But I had to work on, vowels and space and all of this, to try to create as much bass sound as I could with limited skill.
Right.
But then when I went to tenor, I was still using all that apparatus. And what I learned was that the target for a bass, the note is like that. And the target for a tenor, it's about that big. It's a laser beam.
Right.
It doesn't mean that your mouth shape is small, but it's definitely smaller. But a lot of times when people sing tenor, they overphonate, and honestly, it's way less pressure, way less PSI, because the foundation of that chord is really not you. All you're trying to do is put pixie dust on the top of it and not distract. It's not as an important part as the lead, and it's not as important as the bass and the baritone. So really, I think the tenor goes last in the order. As long as you've got the right stack underneath you, then really all you got to do, it's like, think about a diamond and a jeweler's hammer. Would you hit it with a sledgehammer and pound it into dust? Every note you hit, it's just tink, right? All you're doing is you're just, because you got to crack that diamond on every note, but you can't swing at it too hard. And so it's a ton less weight. And the thing that taught me that was Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys. And I would listen to a lot of Beach Boys stuff, and that guy is just the master at singing in that falsetto kind of headspace without putting a lot of PSI and pressure into it.
Mm.
Now, again, if you got a guy like Drew Kirkman and somebody who can really rip at it, or Lester Rector from Four Voices, I mean, that's great. But those are only little feature places. The rest of the time, you got to get out of the way. And if you think about like a flock of geese flying, the geese at the front, the goose at the front, that's the lead, right? And if he says we're going left, then by God, we're all going left, but it can't be flat. So the tenor's got to get back out of the way like everybody else and let your ear go to the melody singer. So I would say the first one is take most of the weight and the pressure out of the voice. And you'll sing longer. You'll not go home with a sore throat. And your job, again, really is to just put pixie dust on top of all the chords. Your part is not that important unless you screw up, and then everybody will hear. because if the bass has got a target that big, you got all kinds of places in that target, and the human ear, because of the frequencies, will go, yeah, he sang the note right. But with the tenor, with it being that big, there's no room for error.
Right.
So the demand on singing tenor is you've got to be amazingly accurate. But if you put weight and pressure into it, you'll start to drive it flat or short. So that's a big one.
Sure. That's great advice. Cool. Let's take some questions from the chat. I'm going to start with Jeff Foreman's from 8:23 p.m. If you have one that I missed that was before that, throw it in the chat again, and I'll get to it hopefully at the end. Jeff asks, when did you learn you were funny?
I still haven't figured that out yet. Well, you know what? I've always loved to tell jokes, and I've always I've got a gregarious kind of a personality. But with Stormfront, my very first rehearsal was, I said, so is it the Marx Brothers theory where you got the foil and, and all, like, they said, no. I said, wait a minute. All good comedy quartets have that formula. You have to have the straight man, you got to have the foil, you got to have the idiot, you got to have, they were like, yeah, we don't do that. I was like, so wait a minute. So what am I supposed to do? And Jim said, you'll figure it out. So, honestly, what my role became in Stormfront was I'm this audience who gets to be on stage, because half the time I'm just as baffled about what's happening on my right shoulder as you are in the audience looking at Jim wondering what the hell's happening over my right shoulder.
Yeah.
Because it's never the same. And he takes great joy in just trying to bust you up. So half the time I'm looking at him, and then I'm looking back at the audience, breaking that wall, going, can you? So I just sort of became the what the hell guy, and that became my role. Was and I'll tell you another weird side, and thank you, Jeff, for that. Rick LaRosa said, I'm going to twist this around. Everybody expects Jim to be funny, but I'm going to make Jim the straight man. And you three act like idiots, and let Jim be the guy who's flummoxed all the time, that he's surrounded by idiots. And that works 99% of the time for us. So it's really easy, because all you have to do is just be an idiot, and it's fun when you're in an environment with people who encourage that.
Right.
I remember, Jeff, when I was younger, I saw a bumper sticker that said, when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. And people that know me really well know that there's the line, and there's Jeff. So it didn't take a lot of encouragement for me to become Jane and Tarzan.
Right. That's amazing. Cool. Clem asks, can you still sing bass?
Oh yeah. Yep. In fact, me and Mark Hale and Johnny Bugarin and Tyler Wigginton had formed a quartet called Revere back in January. And that was the part I was singing. And prior to that, I was in Florida. I was flying to Florida last fall, singing with Ryan Killeen and Kyle Snook and Shane Scott.
Wow.
And that was on bass as well. And man, those are some big horses.
Yeah.
No pun, Shane and his weight, but Ryan and Shane and Kyle can burn some wet grass. So I was trying to keep up. But yeah, that's I was singing bass in both of those. I feel like I have some unfinished business
Right.
on that part.
Sure, I can imagine. Um, Rich asks, what words of advice do you feel are most important to give to a guy who is beginning to sing barbershop and is vocally someone who can learn to sing tenor?
When I first started, I was given a polecat tape. I don't even know if they do that anymore, but that for me was really important, that I kind of cut my teeth on just stock barbershop arrangements, even though it might seem remedial by today's standards. But Down Our Way and Heart of My Heart and Wait Till the Sun Shines Nelly and I'll Take You Home Again Kathleen, and that was really amazing. And I remember when I got my cassette, that was these Barber Polecats, and it was the Regents, our champs from, when did the Regents win? 73?
That's right. Yeah.
So and so I when you turned the tape over, your part was missing.
Right.
That blew my mind. That blew my mind that I could actually, vocalize into that cassette recorder, and I could hear my note line up in the hole where that note was missing.
Right.
And all these years later, it's still so valuable, having started just learning just basic barbershop craft and having that be in my ear. Now, I love me some ringmasters, and I love, the bells of Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
But most guys can't do that,
Right.
including this guy. So what I really love is singing barbershop. And so I would say, first of all, you got to learn all the classics, because then you can stand around in any barbershop arena and find 3 other guys and say, Heart of My Heart, blow an A flat. And
Right.
you're gonna have friends. But then as moving forward, somebody who wants to sing tenor, that Roger Love speech level singing exercise thing is so amazing. It's got tons of great exercises, and it's designed to work. Quick side.
Sure.
So speech level singing, right? What is that?
Yeah.
Where you have a singer's voice and you have a speaking voice. So this is my speaking voice.
Mm-hmm.
If I was going to sing, I wouldn't sing in this voice, because you have to create the singer's apparatus to sing. You got to create a little bit of space, right? So when I coach with courses, I say, everyone say, how now brown cow. It's like, how now brown cow. I said, now I want you to say that like James Earl Jones, right? And then, oh no, brown, and then they overdo it. And I'm like, okay,
right.
but now put your hand in your Adam's apple. You created space. You lifted the hard palate, and we kind of walk through that. But there's absolutely a singer's voice and a talking voice, and a lot of amateurs will sing in their talking voice. And so the speech level singing, the idea of that is to trying to find a bridge between the two, because a lot of times, especially in barbershop, we've tried to push it so far to create space, the holy moly and over phonating, that we'd actually fallen into a bit of a trap, and it doesn't sound natural. So you don't want to talk, you don't want to sing in your talking voice, because you can actually do a little damage there. And you don't want to overdo it the other way. So that speech level singing would be highly recommended, because it's absolutely phenomenal.
Right. Find the right sort of speech that will help you sing well. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not just for tenors, it's for all 4 parts.
Sure. Question from Jeremy. When y'all are crafting a comedy performance, do you start learning the music before or after the whole comedy act is planned out and comes together? What's the general order of operations?
That is a great question. So it always starts with the concept. So Light a Rose, Sid came up with that. Everyone thinks it's Jim, and Jim's done his share. But some of the funniest crap we do came from Sid. Sid's like Tom Hanks. He's got like funny in his bones. And he's really obtuse. So it always comes up with an idea. And then from the idea, since Darren's an arranger, he'll try to flesh, like, well, what song would we sing with that? And so it always first just starts conceptually, and then we have something to sing, and then we put that together vocally and learn all the notes and words, and then start adding all of the nonsense to it. one of the things you've probably noticed with Stormfront is we really don't sing difficult material.
Mhm.
And that's on purpose because we don't want you paying attention to the singing, thank God. But the more complicated the singing is, the more it's going to draw you away from the comedy. So we pick relatively easy stuff to sing. We just try to sing it as well as we can, but have no distractions vocally. So that's
Mhm.
part one, I guess, after the concept, and then we start adding in all of the shtick and the bits. And you've probably also noticed that we plan places to stop. And part of that is to hit a beat or a punchline and allow you to react. It's also for us to swallow and to do and just sort of maybe clear your throat. And it's really hard when you listen to people who sing for 3.5 minutes and they're singing this really amazing but hard stuff. It's like, where do you swallow? Where do you, it's really, really difficult to do that. So we were lucky that, when we plan the shtick, it's designed on purpose to allow us to have a little recovery and for you to get it out of your system. And then the idea is try to make the comedy, go like this, and then hopefully knock you, on your tail. But the third part that's the hardest of all is the singing that you worked on falls apart when you put all the crap in.
Right.
And then the third one is you got to do it all over again, the same amount of hours, and do that.
Wow.
So that's that why it's harder than anything else to do if you do it well. And we were really lucky that Sid, Jim, and Darren have this amazing barometer that they know what you're going to think is funny. A lot of people come up with what they think is funny and it's not funny. And people send us stuff all the time and say, hey, we want you to help us be funny. And like, you can't make people be funny. You either are or you aren't. If you're willing to be free and take chances, people appreciate that. But if the material still isn't funny, it's the worst thing in the world is trying to be funny and have it fall flat.
Right.
And we've done a ton of that in our experimentation. But for us, it was a learning, right? We culled out what didn't work. And when we went to England, they laughed at all of the stuff that American audiences didn't laugh at, which is really, because I'm a Monty Python fan. So, I love that cheeky British humor. But it was weird because when we do our first song, there's a couple 3 beats in it that we expect the audience to respond to, and that tells us what kind of an audience we got.
Right.
And then the second song, is meant to dig the knife in a little bit deeper, and by the third song, we should have you.
Right.
And so, but in England, they were loving it, but they were laughing at all the wrong places, and it threw our timing off.
Right.
And then we went to Japan, and that whole Japan thing could be a 45 minutes on a different show. So
Wow.
Anyway, great question. That's exactly how it plays out.
That's very, very good answer. How do you balance your tone quality between head falsetto versus a mix?
So that was something that I actually fell down the stairs and landed on my feet, because I didn't know what any of that was, because I had spent 30 years of my barbershop career singing bass. So as I said, where my break is, and when you cross over and I'm into falsetto, the lower part of my falsetto is really very, scratchy and doesn't have a lot of bite to it. But over time, as I got stronger, like anything else, I started to notice that my break was rising, and I was able to transition from full voice to, now it helps to sing with guys that have pretty good sized voices, because then I can just kind of plant it in there and I'm not exposed. But all of a sudden, Sid said to me, "Oh man, that was you really kind of mixed that really well." And I honestly didn't know what he was talking about. But what I had developed, and I didn't know I had done it, was that I was able to kind of roll back and forth between full voice and falsetto in that mixed register space.
Right.
but it was completely by accident. I honestly didn't know that I was doing it. Because I'm most of the time with Stormfront, it's like being on a log, and I'm just trying not to fall off.
Right.
Wow. But what it was is that the speech level singing that I was doing an hour every day was developing skills that I didn't even know that I had done that. And then all of a sudden Darren was like, wait, do that again. And I did it. And he was like, holy crap, that took 1.5 years. Like most people, that takes 5 years to learn how to do that. And I said, I don't even know what you're talking about.
That's great.
I mean, nice. I'm extremely lucky. I don't want anybody to, the 65 people that are on here, I don't want anybody to receive that as arrogance or hey, look at
we're
me.
Down to 63. 2 of them thought you were too arrogant.
Oh, good. Good. So yeah, it's completely by luck.
That's a great answer. Okay, we're a little over time, so I just want to thank you again for this. This is fantastic. I know everyone here got a lot out of this. So many great words of wisdom, so many great stories. You're so generous with your time, and I want to thank you on behalf of everyone on this call. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Would love to do it again. I'm sure you've got lots of people lined up, but somewhere down the road, I would be honored to.
We'll hear about that.
Come back.
That Japan story.
Oh man. Yeah. Yeah. Just us and Roger Ross in Tokyo Disneyland. That alone could be an hour.
I would love to hear about that. That sounds pretty hilarious. Well, thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Gabe.
Yeah. All right.
Bye.
Bye. Wow, that was great. Thanks to everyone who joined us who's not a VR member.